Are you fascinated by true crime stories that hit close to home? Then you need to check out the gripping new book, Allegedly, True Crime from Pontotoc County, Oklahoma. From vigilante justice in the Wild West to headline-grabbing trials of the last few decades, Allegedly uncovers the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface of the community. In Pontotoc County, Oklahoma, with over a dozen cases, there's something for every true crime aficionado. Available now in ebook, paperback, and traditional hardback at your favorite online store like Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble, or your favorite library app. To find a retailer, go to ravenrollins.com. Don't miss your chance to read Allegedly, True Crime from Pontotoc County, Oklahoma.
On December 31st, 1984, Tonya Ethridge McKinley was out with friends celebrating New Year's Eve and the start of her new life in Pensacola, Florida. Finally free from an abusive relationship, she was just weeks from her 24th birthday and moving toward becoming the person she'd always wanted to be. Tonya's body was found dumped on the side of the road, half naked, raped, beaten and strangled to death in the early morning hours of New Year's Day.
It's been a rough 35 years. Tonya will never rest in peace. She was always the protector, and then when she was gone, I didn't have my protector anymore. Even in the bad days, she would always have a way to make everybody laugh when they really wasn't a whole lot to laugh about, you know. She was just always like that. You've got to just keep on fighting for them, because they're not around to fight for themselves.
Chase the Devil by Tony Adame takes readers back to that rainy December night in 1984 and barrels forward like a freight train, moving across the decades and delving into the details of the crime, as well as the lives of the victims, their families, the suspects, and the law enforcement officers who kept the case alive. Investigative journalist Tony Adame immerses readers in the investigation and tries to answer the questions of what really happened to Tonya that night and who took her life. Welcome to the podcast where I have Tony Adame with me, the author of Chase the Devil, Murder and Obsession on Florida's Gulf Coast, and host of the podcast The Sheriff, Murder, Lies, and Revenge in Okaloosa County.
From chilling novels and psychological thrillers to horror short stories, film and screenplays, to true crime, podcasts, music, and the art of storytelling itself, Dreadfully Yours invites listeners into conversations with the minds behind the stories that stay with us. Hosted by author, audiobook narrator, and podcaster Raven Rollins, each chapter blends cinematic narration with intimate discussions exploring creativity, suspense, and the human experiences woven into dark storytelling. Welcome to the show, where stories linger long after the last page. This is Dreadfully Yours.
I want to start with your background, if that's cool. You can tell me a little bit about your background in journalism.
Of course, yeah. I was a sports writer I've been a sports writer, I still am, for over 20 years now. Not too much over 20 years, but pretty much since I got out of college. I did that full time for, till now. And I think it was, 6 or 7 years ago, I started kind of expanding and thinking of other things I might do. And it led me to investigations and doing this book.
Did you ever report on any crime like before this at all?
With my beat with sports, sometimes crime and sports would intersect a little bit. And I would do kind of sometimes offshoot stories on stuff, but never anything really concentrated or never anything that was just like a one-off, so it's pretty minimal.
Tell me what it was like working at these are bigger places like the Wichita Eagle, what's another, Pensacola News Journal, Northwest Florida Daily News. What's it like working for a place like that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, I always kind of think with what I did, being in journalism, maybe I was born about 20 years too late, because I just always I love being in the newsroom and, you know, kind of that environment of, you know, you see the movies when you're a kid, like All the President's Men, and kind of, I think I got a taste of that. But, you know, my era was one where people really, especially after the pandemic, people moved away from, you know, the newsroom type of feel. And I mean, I really enjoyed my career. Some of it was like, you know, traveling a lot, covering a beat for a team was something I always wanted to do. But eventually it became something different, I guess. And it is something different now.
Before we get to the book, you did something before the book, which was a podcast, right? Called The Sheriff, Murder, Lies, and Revenge in Okaloosa County. Tell me a little bit about that.
Starting to see a theme here. The murder. Yeah. You know, when I got, you know, laid off from the News Journal at the beginning of 2019, and, you know, had like 6 months where I wasn't working, then got back to work with the Northwest Florida Daily News, general assignment reporter. And they were trying to get into podcasts. And at the same time, I was working on, you know, the book that came out, but wanted to kind of explore. I didn't know if it was going to be a book or a podcast. And I got really lucky that a guy, Nick Tomachek, was a producer there. And he was all in on me doing a podcast and whatever I wanted. And I really wanted to explore like the true crime, just see how it would work and kind of get the structure of it in my mind. And we found a really interesting case about a sheriff who had been murdered in a county where our newspaper was at back in the, you know, way back in the 1930s. And it was like this really interesting story of why he'd been murdered, what had led up to his murder. He was, you know, trying to kind of redo the county and what the priorities for the county were. And, you know, how one of his sons, who was there the night he got assassinated in his home, essentially became the sheriff almost 20 years later, the youngest sheriff in the history of Florida. And right away went to work trying to figure out who killed his dad. And you had this real intersection of like revenge and how do we want that served to people and what is justice. And, you know, it did really well. You know, we were both surprised by how well it did. And obviously, you know, anything you record 6 years ago and listen back to, you kind of cringe a little bit, but I'm really proud of it still.
How many episodes did you do for that?
I want to say we did 6 episodes, and then I wrote I did 6 episodes that are an hour long each, and I wrote a long form series for the newspaper that ran over like a whole week.
Oh, wow.
And then I think, yeah, I know, it was a lot of work. And then we did it did really well and got a lot of reactions. So we did like a 7th episode, like kind of Nick and I did kind of like talk to the fans kind of episodes. So I think it was 7 episodes total, I think.
And it's all on this one case. I'm assuming that it's on pretty much any podcast player.
Yeah, anywhere. Yeah. Apple, Spotify, everywhere. It's out there. It's just called The Sheriff. Yeah.
I haven't listened yet. I've been reading the book, and I've watched the documentary now that you were in. I think, what was it on? Cold Case Files.
Yep, Cold Case
So there's a documentary on there if you guys out there want to go check that out when we're done here. But we're really here today to talk about, which is your debut. How did you feel? Because you just said that you wrote kind of a long form article. How did you feel that was different than trying to put together a book?
You know, honestly, it really wasn't. And I think that doing that long form, that 7-piece article, kind of really got me in the mode for this. So I didn't find it much different because I approached the book almost like with some little changes here and there, really like I was wanted to tell a compelling story, but also wanted to tell something that was linear and that someone could, you know, pick up. You know, it's not really long. It's only like 200 pages. Read and just go point A to point B with a few little, you know, at the end, a few little hooks and turns. But I thought it really helped me, actually, getting to do all that. I didn't find it much different. I found the process to all that stuff, learning how to lay stuff out and kind of seeing, and you know this because you've written true crime books, seeing what point A to point B is and not wanting to get off that path too much.
Do you think that doing The Sheriff helped at all in the process, or was it just completely different than any of your long form writing?
I think it helped in that I knew, I kind of knew the research part of it was, it told me that I was kind of on the right path because I was working on this simultaneously as I was working on The Sheriff at different points. The whole work for The Sheriff was really concentrated and took like 3 months to do, like everything, all that work, which is crazy.
Wow.
But it kind of told me that I was on the right path. And, so the sheriff comes out, and then, within as the sheriff was coming out, this other case was kind of coming to a conclusion, which I didn't know at the time. So it was like a lot going on. And
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, it told me that I could handle a lot of different, inputs to my output, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty wild how much you can get done when you're determined to do it, though.
Especially when you look back and you think, what was I thinking, taking all this stuff on? But really happy with how everything turned out.
So was the sheriff your first kind of big introduction into long form true crime? And what made you decide to kind of switch all of a sudden to go into true crime?
I think I'd done a story, just kind of newspapers I'd worked at. They'd encourage people to look, kind of right outside of whatever you were writing once a year. And I'd done a story that did really well. That got a good response in Wichita on a school shooting there in the mid 1980s that had gotten a really good response. And that was kind of my first long form, kind of dip into true crime, I guess, or something like that. And I guess what made me decide was just natural curiosity, Raven, and just kind of wanting to just expand and just in my heart, in my mind, I knew I kind of had something else in there other than, Team A beat Team B, but it took a while. It took a long time. So hoping against hope, I had something a little more in there for me. But
what made you decide to write a book on this one instead of doing another long form podcast?
I kind of got to the point where with that podcast, it was good and I enjoyed the experience, but I felt like maybe there were some limitations on it that I really couldn't stick to as far as, saying, all right, well, with the podcast, they can be timeless. Really great ones can be timeless. But sometimes, there's some stuff there that maybe makes it like you feel like you got to be on this deadline or this or that. And I didn't want that feeling. And I felt so much more comfortable just writing longer that I knew that once I got into that part of it, I felt like, how it is. I mean, you've written books, so you know this. It's like when you get into the part of writing the book where you're in it, you really feel like you're kind of in this bubble. And you're going about your daily life, and you got your boyfriend or your husband or whatever's going on with you, but you're existing in like your own world. And I really found that to be pretty thrilling once I got into the writing of the book. And I think I'd heard a podcast I listened to, Bill Simmons had kind of described it that way when he was writing a book one time. And it's just, I really found myself thriving in that environment of like kind of me. It's not me against the world, but it feels like it a little bit because you're working on something and doing something you want to be big in your heart and you hope can be big and nobody kind of knows. And I really enjoyed that. So I think that was kind of it for me.
Yeah, I agree because I do feel that way too. Different, medium. It's so different writing a script or even recording the podcast than it is sitting down and, like you said, you really live in that bubble for a while. And somebody has to come and tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, it's time to eat something or whatever. But when we're writing, we're probably on our couch or something like that. And we're getting, sucked into this. Everything in this house is my work zone now. And it's hard to get out of that work zone. So
that's a really good way to describe it. That's a wonderful way to describe it. I feel like too, with this book coming out, I feel like I kind of been, not that I've been proven right totally, but I feel like the range of the book and where the book has gone already just in a couple months is exceeded what the podcast did or what I had hoped for the podcast. So I'm not saying I wouldn't do a podcast again because they're awesome. And some of my favorite storytelling forms have been through podcasts. But for me with this was really important. It was done this way.
So you were living on Florida's Gulf Coast. So this story that you wrote about, this was right there with you, kind of like me and Allegedly. How did you come across this case? Was it organic through, just seeing it on the news or whatever? Or did somebody come to you and say, hey, you should really look into this and kind of go from there?
No, I pretty much found it on my own. I'd had kind of when I was working at the newspaper in Pensacola, I was in charge of the news shift on weekends and had been given an assignment for evergreen stories that they could just run whenever, to get the reporters to do them, and the reporters didn't want to work on them one weekend. And just looking to put something together. I'd gone to the FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement website, and went looking for I was just going to do a list of cold cases in that area, and found a few from this area, and just found one from March 1985, a woman named Patricia Stevens, and then went in the archive and found out that was the second woman that had been killed in a really similar manner in a few months in the same area. And I think from just there, that was, any good story, I think, from a storyteller's perspective, starts with some curiosity. And I think that was where the curiosity got. And, for me, it quickly turned into an obsession, kind of, tracking everything down, trying to put everything together. And then there was kind of this fear of like, what am I doing? I've dedicated so much of my time to this. And then, I had a breakthrough. It's in the book. There's a breakthrough that I get, I want to say 4 or 5 months in, I had a pretty significant breakthrough. And then it was just kind of all in. I was on the other side of all that fear and that obsession and curiosity. I was in it.
What we're talking about is the book Chase the Devil, Murder and Obsession on Florida's Gulf Coast. And I kind of had another kind of local question, I guess, because you were a local. So how did being a local kind of influence your perspective or maybe your approach to this story?
The way it influenced it mostly was because I had access to, I was living in the area where the crime occurred. And like you talked about, so I had, I could drive to where the murders occurred or where the bodies were found. I could, drive to meet with family members. I could, walk in to wherever I needed to pick up documents, or, if I had to, I could have lunch with somebody. So, it put me in it. I was in the middle of it. I had access to the people, who were still left, because we're talking about, now 35 years later from when the crimes occurred. It put me in the middle of it, I think, whereas sometimes you'd write about something where maybe you're far removed from it physically. It's kind of not the same.
I truly believe in being able to have access to locations, because that's just, it can severely change your perspective just standing where they were, where they lived, where they worked, where they, the clubs they went to or whatever. Did you have any moments where maybe that happened to you, where you perceived something differently and then you showed up and you were like, oh, that's different?
I think the biggest misperception that I had was the police. Because never having dealt with anything where I dealt extensively with the police for a story like this, where I never had that hand-to-hand, talking with them. I think the way I viewed their role in it versus what their role actually was probably speaks to what you're asking about, where I didn't understand what they were doing, or I didn't understand what they had done, other than a really surface level. But then once I got involved and I started to see it, everything, changed my perspective drastically.
These detectives, especially the ones that came in, after the fact, the ones that you worked with, they are way up here. And I'm reading through this stuff and how they were so they're just so good at what they do in every aspect. I'm so jealous right now.
Yeah, I got pretty spoiled for, my first, thing I ever worked on with these, and getting to know them, know their personal lives and know their stories, and seeing how they approach their work. Yeah, I feel like I really lucked out, and I feel really fortunate that that's the group that I got. And, from a more objective point of view, it's I did tap into the investigations division right away, which is a lot of times the more veteran cops that have been there for a long time. But I feel really lucky. I feel really fortunate.
You're looking into this case. You find the first girl. You go back. Well, technically, you find the second girl. You go back. You find the first one. And you're kind of looking into it. When is the moment when you're like, okay, this is my book?
I think it was probably meeting with the victims, the first victim's sister, going and sitting down with her. On an emotional level, I feel like I connected with her. I could see her pain, feel her pain, and really it came through that she'd been living with it for 30 years. But, on a more, kind of tactile level, she had been so dedicated to it. She'd kept 20 years of printed off emails, for example. she kept all kinds of old documents. And that was really a treasure trove of information for me, because it gave me more names, it gave me more leads. It showed me, you know, her being so diligent was a big break for me. And for me personally, like getting to be around her and see, gosh, you know, this person, you can't help but be around. Her name's Renee. You can't help but be around Renee for a few minutes and talk about this and really feel, you know, the pain and what's happened to her and what's happened to her family. And that was pretty impactful for me.
Family members, and I think that maybe a lot of true crime content creators, podcasters, writers, whatever, don't realize that the families can really be like a treasure trove of information. That really shows you their passion, though, for like keeping this case going. And it's kind of heartbreaking, but it also kind of shows you how just strong and resilient these family members can be.
Don't you think that's also where you're going to find out who the victim really was too? Like from the, I feel like the family, the people that were closest to the victim, which are usually the family members, are going to be the ones that really you get to know who this person was and, you know, what they wanted out of life and who they were in the time leading up to their death. I feel like that's where I got to know Tonya the most, the first victim.
Absolutely. I think that you get a really good feeling for it. And the longer that you sit with the family members, they are the key to showing people. And that's another thing that I wish like more true crime writers, even podcasters would do, is that I feel like there's very little of us out there actually trying to show who the victim was, other than just being a victim. I think you did a really good job of that, by the way.
Thank you.
And of course, that, you know, that comes from, you know, sitting with the family members. So, you know, I commend you for that. A lot of people don't do that.
I agree with you. That is how, you know, the podcasts that I find myself really drawn to, true crime wise, do focus more on they focus more on the victims and they tell their story. I mean, eventually you have to get to what happened, but like, you know, to me, the best true crime podcast is Case File. And that, you know, they even make a point of with their episodes, they don't name them unless sometimes they do when they have to, but like most of their episodes are named, you know, for the victims and not for the killer.
Mine too.
Which I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I did that in Allegedly as well. I tried to name every chapter after the victims instead of a perpetrator when I could, unless it was like mass something. But yeah, I think that we really need to start looking more into victim-centric true crime, because I feel like it makes us slow down and really care about who we're reading about, who we're listening about. And there's only really a handful of books out there that I can say do that, and yours is definitely one of them. So
thank you. I knew it wouldn't be much without telling her story as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, so your subtitle mentions both murder and obsession. Can you tell me a little bit about how maybe obsession plays a role in this story?
Yeah, I think that was, you know, I think the ego part of me being a writer, I think that was maybe me putting myself in it a little bit, which is, you know, it wasn't just me that was obsessed with it. And I think that a group of people that helped were, you know, me, her sister, it did become an obsession for me, for other people too. I think the people that really moved the case along were the ones that let it consume their lives in a way. You know, there were detectives over the years that were, you know, wrapped up in this. There were family members that were wrapped up in it. And so while it wasn't just me, part of it was me too.
Can you give us just a little breakdown of maybe the beginning, how this case started?
Yeah. New Year's Eve, 1984, Pensacola, Florida, kind of a beach community right on that Gulf Coast region of Florida, called the Redneck Riviera, I guess people call it. Beautiful white sand beaches, a woman in an upper middle class neighborhood. Her dog is sick and she wants to take it to an all-night vet clinic. Waits for her daughter and her boyfriend to get home from partying on New Year's Eve. It's rainy, it's storming. They pull out of their driveway about 3:00 in the morning to take that dog to the vet, and they see a dead body. Clothes ripped off mostly, facing away from the street, a woman in her 20s. They call it in, and it's just from there, it's, you know, pretty obvious she's been raped, pretty obvious that she's been, you know, there's been a violent encounter. To some of the detectives that showed up, there were differing views on it, but it's also pretty obvious that she was killed somewhere else and dumped here in this neighborhood. And that kind of sets off a 35-year journey of multiple generations of detectives and forensics people and, the family, all looking for answers to who killed this girl, who picked her up. We know where she's at on New Year's Eve, New Year's morning till about 1 o'clock in the morning. And then something happens to her between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. that ends her life in a very violent, scary way. And those 2 hours become the crux of, 35 years of investigations and people looking into it and people trying to get to the bottom of it. And leads to, eventually leads to me and a detective, doing something very unusual at one point and finally taking those steps and feeling like, maybe we can get some closure.
Again, I'm like super impressed with you guys' police departments. You just never see that happen.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of investigative journalists being given access like I did?
No. No. If anything, they usually tell you to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I still can't explain it. I can't explain why that particular detective made that decision or why I was doing it so much. I mean, I guess I have kind of the reasons I gave you, but I don't know what happened. And I still think about it and think back at it, and I can't believe how it all went down.
It is in your book about how this came to be, so I don't want to give too much away. But when you started and you decided you wanted to write a book on this, you met up with the police department. Tell me how that went.
Well, I had done an open records request, and don't worry about spoiling or anything like that. I did an open records request, and I got turned down, but I got the initial report, the crime report on it, which said some basics, gave me a little information. And I want to say that they called it an open, I got denied the file because it was still an ongoing investigation. And I wrote back pretty quickly. I wrote back an email, and it was right around the time, it was probably 6 months after they identified the Golden State Killer through the familial DNA. And talking to the family, I wrote back and said, hey, I see what you guys have done. I go, I don't know if this can be considered an open investigation because it's 30 years. However, the family is under the impression that she may have fought with her killer and that some of the family members had seen her body afterward and they said it looked like her nails or her hands were kind of beat up. If there is any DNA or skin underneath the nails, is there any way you guys might have access to this, GEDmatch or 23andMe or that method of doing it? Because it might be helpful. About a month after that, I got a call from a high-level assistant at the PPD and I got a cell phone number for the head of investigations, said to call him, and I called him, and he said, come meet me. And we met up, and we talked, and at the end of the conversation, he said he was going to do something very unusual, and he was going to offer me access he was going to reopen the investigation. He had a pretty big budget. He was going to give me access, whatever I needed, whatever I wanted, and we were going to try to solve it together, ostensibly. And I had to keep it a secret, but that was fine. And, the next year, I think it took us, the next year I was embedded essentially with that investigations unit, secret meetings, going over suspect lists and trying to track down a killer.
So for me, that's like a dream come true. For you to walk in and want, to talk to the investigator on it and them to go, you know what, here's everything. And also join me.
Part of that was I came in the next day and he gave me the whole case file, which was in a box. And let me just say, PPD, you're welcome. I digitized it for him. But
yeah, that's just a dream come true for people, who do this.
I thought I was really fortunate then, and I still think that now.
But there had to be some caveats to this. I mean, you just said you had to keep it a secret for, I think in your book you said, a year at least?
Well, he wanted me to do it till the case was solved. I said, I can't do that. I don't know when it'll be solved. And we just said a year we'd talk again and agree. A year later, we had a resolution, but it was never, the only real caveat was to keep it a secret, which I didn't find very hard. And other than that, there weren't really, it was really just how much did I want to be involved, which ended up being 100%. So there weren't a lot of do this or do that. It was pretty open thought, his only thing was he wasn't going to look at it from the perspective I was looking at it, which was like an investigative journalist, talk to the family, talk to all these people. His was more science. what's the science tell us? Now, all that other stuff eventually came into play, but he was so good at what he did, and he knew which way he wanted to go. It was actually a really good experience.
So I know that you guys essentially hit, I guess, what you would call roadblocks, because you take us down a bunch of different roads that led to different, suspects and stuff like that. But in the actual solve, what do you think was the biggest roadblock? Other
than the killer being determined to, take it to his grave, one of the big roadblocks was we were really trying to avoid, letting people in the area know. So when we were doing, DNA stuff, it was always going outside of that. And then once we started to kind of run into some walls there, like, hey, we're not being able to build out these family trees like we want. The lead detective essentially closed the net or closed the circle. He brought it in closer, and he started looking at more people. Went from I don't want people to know to maybe we're in the end game, so let's let people know. And I think he knew that the whole time, that he was going to be able to turn the pressure up at a certain moment. And once he turned the pressure up locally, it sprung the case open. So I think it was just him knowing when to hold back and when to kind of push forward. Credit to Captain Chuck Mallett for just kind of knowing, being a detective for 25 years and knowing what buttons to push.
He's so great. I'm just I can't get over how great he is. Did you have any pushback at all? I know that there were a bunch of people that you talked to and you work with, especially the family, but did you have any pushback from anybody?
Yeah. I don't want to call too many people out over it, but yeah, there was a lot of pushback. And I think that even some of the people that push back, I always try to keep it pretty even and, be objective. And when people would push back, I'd always try to look at things from their perspective. Mm-hmm. I don't know that 20 years from now, I'm going to want to people looking into the stuff, say, oh, here's everything he did wrong in his personal life 20 or 30 years ago. But, when somebody gets killed or there's a murder involved, some of that stuff is going to come back up. And I think I understand why they don't want that. But on the other hand, there's something else bigger out there. And your personal life is just going to have to, if it's collateral damage to finding out who killed someone, then that's how it's got to be.
Yeah, I understand that completely. When you started kind of diving into stuff, did you ever at any point really 100% think we can solve this? Or was everything always just kind of up in the air?
I think anybody that starts one of these, I had some enthusiasm at the beginning. Definitely once I started working with the police, I was like, we're going to do our best, but I don't know if this will ever get solved. And, we've been given odds, or people told us, hey, this is, highly unsolvable, it seems like. And I always tried to stay positive, but I think there was a point where I didn't give up, but I was like, man, I'm just going to do as best as I can. I know they're going to do the best they can, and we're just all going to have to live with it. And we're going to really, you kind of tell yourself that. It kind of is like when you're playing sports. I remember it's like, man, sometimes you're playing a team you don't think you can beat, but you're still going to show up and you're still going to give it everything you got, because you never know what could happen. And I kind of told myself, kind of taking from what Tonya's sister told me one time, like she had resolved over 20 years or so that it wasn't ever going to get solved. But her thing was she couldn't live with herself if she didn't keep trying. And I think that kind of ended up being my motto for myself. That I'm speaking for myself now, was like, I am going to finish this in whatever form it comes in, and however it comes out, no matter what, I'm going to finish it. And if we don't solve it, that's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be terrible. But I can still look at myself in the mirror and say, hey, you didn't abandon ship. You didn't give up on it. You did everything you could to help with this.
So you kind of pushed for genetic genealogy and phenotypes, stuff like that before you even really dove into it, that you were pushing for that the whole time. But when they agreed and said, we're going to do that, did you still kind of maintain that, okay, but if we don't get something, that's fine? Or did it kind of boost you a little bit to know that they were going to do that?
Well, to know they were luckily for me, unbeknownst to me, they were sniffing down those same paths I was on. So it's not like I was explaining it to them. They knew what it was. I had a really great forensics person, Nicole and Chuck were both on that. I think just me, maybe I was like their encouragement, like their cheerleader section almost. No, it didn't encourage me though, because once we talked to the lab people, it was like the connections, the phenotypes and the centimorgans were so far off of solving a case or where they needed to be that they had put it almost at like not an impossibility, but close to impossible to solve. So it was, no, I wasn't encouraged, and there was more stuff that happened along the way that made me discouraged. So if anything, throughout the process, I think I got more of a dose of reality than anything. And as I did more research and I got access to the case files, I also was able to see things I didn't know, like that, for 2 years after she got killed, people had just gone after it. Then for a big space of time, they'd gone after the DNA and couldn't find anything. And then another detective took the case up in like 2008. He worked on it for like 6, 7, 8 years. He went down every rabbit hole he could and couldn't find anything. So I didn't think, me, sports writer, playing investigative journalist at the time, was going to, make an impact or help with anything. But, things turned out in the end.
So a lot of people out there don't like books or podcasts or whatever that don't have, like a solve. So I do want to throw this out real quick. This case was solved. That's like what the whole book is about.
Solved. Yeah, it's how it was solved goes down a couple of different roads, but yeah.
What do you think was the hardest part for you to write about?
The details of, her murder, and then the second murder were, as I became more embedded with the police, and they started to, warm up to me, and I started to get their theories. And, at the very end, there was another detective I worked with who I think, a guy named Danny Harnett, put together probably the best, I guess, version of what happened from what we all found out. I think that was it. Just realizing how scared she must have been, and how awful a way to die that was, and just, what sort of evil she ran into was hard. I think that was probably it, like kind of putting myself in those shoes.
Did you ever, because sometimes I have a hard time once I get into the victim's shoes, or even the family members, and seeing things from their perspective, sometimes I think it's hard to kind of look at the other side of things. Did you ever find yourself trying to get into the murderer's thoughts and wonder, what he was thinking?
I went as hard at that as I did with anything else. I didn't have as much luck with that because, his family was pretty stonewalled against talking to me. But I did have some conversations. I did everything I could. I mean, I had, people that knew him in his day-to-day life. I had public records. I mean, I got down to the brass tacks. I mean, I even could tell you, all the property that his mom owned that she deeded to him when she died. I knew, where he'd lived. I knew how much money he'd made. I feel like I ended up knowing everything about him that I could. The only thing I paused on was he has a son, an adult son. And I think that was where I hit my, talking to his sisters who I knew were involved with him. Trying to reach out to his ex-wife, that's fine. I think that was the only part where I paused a little bit, was with his son. And he's still even mentioned in there. It's still mentioned in there what happened with the kid after the crime went down. I think that was maybe my stopping point. We're going after that, but I feel like I had everything I needed at that point. I knew who he was. I knew what he'd done. I knew what he'd done over a longer period of time too.
You have basically, from what happened from point A to point B, all in one, the front, I would say 2/3 of the book. And then in the back, you have kind of this like almost diary sort of style entry where you put in all of your personal memoirs from it. So I was just kind of wondering, like, was it your idea to keep those separate from the rest of the book? You just wanted to tell the story first, or whose idea was that?
It was me. I'd written, several versions of, I'd started off with a manuscript where I kind of put myself in it, and I didn't, it felt uncomfortable. And I think as I was, writing this book and thinking of the books that I'd really enjoyed or that I'd, took on a lot from in nonfiction, true crime, I never could think of one where they put themselves in it that I really liked, other than like In Cold Blood. But that's Truman Capote. Nobody's ever going to emulate that. Nobody's ever going to do that again. And I started to really think of Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann, and how he was able to tell the story of that tribe and the crimes and the terrible things that had happened to them And then, at the end, he puts his role in it. He brings it into and I thought that was, and this is not Killers of the Flower Moon, maybe someday, but this is not that. But I thought that way of storytelling was going to be, for me, more impactful, because I could tell the story and I can be honest at the end and say, because in the end I say I was there, and then tell what my role was in it, and do it in a way that's not hitting people over the head, or like we talked about, me putting the obsession part in the title, little things like that. It was a way to keep myself in check, essentially, and get the book out and still tell my story. And I feel like when I read it or look back at it, I'm happy with that choice, and I'm okay with it. It's good.
What do you hope that readers take away from this book?
I've thought about that a lot. And I think what I want is, on a really selfish level, I never, it was always a dream of mine to get a book published. And, to have it come out through, get a really good agent, and then get somebody to put it out and all that. What I want is, people to read it and think, if this is my one shot at putting out a book, I wanted to say what I thought about, the human condition. And I know what a douchebag that might make me sound like, but I want people to read it and think like, hey, this guy had a real 20, 30 years from now, this guy had a real way he looked at how people survive and exist, and these little battles that people fight that we never know about and that we never see, but are just as epic as anything else you could ever tap into. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that to come through and say, hey, this guy's, saying something about how he felt about the world, and how he felt about people who, love and lose and fight to get back a little piece of their dignity, or fight for the truth.
Well, I loved it. I devoured it in less than, I think it took me a little over a day to finish it.
Thank you. Good. Not that long.
It's not that long. It's what was it, 200 something?
I think it's just a little over 200 pages. So good book, good beach read, and it's cut quite a bit. I had to do the thing too, where it was reading too much David Gran. You want to get into the details of the way, the crops moved across the plains. And it's sometimes if it's your first book, my guy, maybe just get to the point and give yourself 10 pages at the end,
That's funny. It's funny because it's true.
True. It is true. You're not David Gran. You can't, you're not going to be able to do that. But maybe someday. But
well, what has the response been like? I know that you grabbed that #1 new release spot. We were kind of battling there, both of our books there for a while. And I noticed that you finally grabbed it, which congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
But how has it been received, especially in your hometown, in the town you live in?
I think that people are really well from my perspective. I kind of got to past the point of people are going to, you tell yourself as the book's coming out, am I going to get past the point of do I care if people like it or not? You do. And it's been really good. And I think the thing that's been so, has helped me kind of move past it a little is, just getting it out there. I had a really great college professor, Craig Wright, who was, a wonderful writing professor, Southern Oregon University. The first class I ever took from him, he was like, you write something, you put everything you got into it. And he was just talking about this with short stories. But when you give it up to the class, or you put it out there to be published, it's it kind of doesn't belong to you anymore. It does, but it doesn't. It's for everybody. And I really felt that because I was a mess leading up to the book coming out. And I want to say, other than a few little, things with the publisher, just trying to make sure everything's ducks in a row, I've been really at peace with it. And I like how people responded. And I know it's not a perfect book, but it's my first book and it's out, and I'm happy with it. And I feel good. I don't feel like I left anything. I left it all in the field, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. Leave it all in the field. I love that. Do you think that you personally have found any closure? Maybe just in writing it out and leaving it on the field. Is that some sort of closure, or is there still questions that you need answered?
Well, we never figured out who killed the first girl that I found and the second girl that was killed. So that's, something that I'll call, once a year for the rest of my life. I'll call my FDLE contact to see if they made any moves on it, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen there. Was kind of left with something one of the cops told me, you get closure when you get a conclusion, but in the end, somebody still lost someone, and that to me is there's never going to be closure there, because they lost a family member. The best we could to help them, yes. So that someone died, no, really, because that's always going to be hanging out there. So tough question, Raven.
Do you think that you might write more true crime books?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next, and I have so many things I want to work on, and I still have my full-time job. I write about the NFL, which is a very big industry and pays the bills really well. I mean, I'd like to do something. I'd like to write another book. I know that's going to be, nonfiction, and I don't know if it'll be true crime. I don't know if it'll be, something else. I just hope it'll be interesting. And I hope it's something that I'm looking for, something that did what this book did with me, spark my curiosity and feel that turn into, that obsession, and then maybe make me a little scared. Because I think once I get that feeling, I'll know that I'm onto something. Have I got that feeling yet? No. And I'm looking into different things, but I think I'll know it when I feel it, because I felt it before. And once I feel that spark, I think I'll know. And I hope so. I hope I write another book.
Did you have any fears? Because, it was unsolved, the most of the time that you were writing this book. So did you have any real fears of what if the person gives a whiff of what I'm doing? And how do I keep myself safe or whatever?
Fear, the bigger fear for me in that aspect was I didn't want to give away what the cops were doing. And there was a point where I maybe made a little, it's in the book, I won't go into this too much, but I made a little bit of a, maybe not a slip up, but I was talking to someone, and I think I may have, I didn't want to give anything away, like a suspect or anything like that. That was my biggest fear. Fear for my own personal safety, not really. I'm 6'2", 275 pounds. If someone wants to come into my house or come get me or do something, they might get me, but I'm going to put up a fight. And I don't really fear for myself that much in that aspect, as far as, being scared for my own personal safety or anything like that. Also, I also know how to run too. And I could run probably and dodge and get away with the best of them, or hide under the bed with the best of them. My own personal safety never really occurred to me. Doing things up for other people occurred to me. That was a bigger fear, but me, nah, not really.
I really appreciate you being with me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the book. I wanted to let you know, because I know a lot of people don't like to throw in transcripts, but I love transcripts, probably because I read them a lot, but I love that. So there at the end, when you had the interrogation thrown in there, oh my gosh. I'm telling you right now, Chuck Mallet, some of those parts that he was talking to him, and he was basically I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. I was like, oh my God, mic drop, get out of here. That's all you need. He was just so awesome.
To me, I know I transcribed it, but it took a lot of time to transcribe. I was the one that got it. I think it's maybe arguably the best part of the book. I don't care that I transcribed it. I love it too. I've read it probably 100 times. To me, it's such a master class in an interrogation. I almost think they could teach it. But
yes, I was actually just about to say that. I was like, it needs to be submitted, because there are some people who could learn from it, especially here in Oklahoma. That should literally be a masterclass in interrogation techniques, because
I don't know how fulfilling it is to hear that. Because I went back and forth, and I was like, well, people say I go, I don't care. This is good. It's going in. So thank you.
It is so, seriously. Just beautifully done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I've been talking with Tony about Chase the Devil, Murder and Obsession on Florida's Gulf Coast. You can get the book anywhere online at your local bookstore. I got mine on Amazon if you want to check that out. And you can also find Tony's podcast, The Sheriff, wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you, Tony, so much for being with me. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
It's been wonderful talking with you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of conversations with some of our world's dark storytellers. This story may be over for now.
The next chapter is always waiting to be written.
Until then.
Dreadfully yours, Raven Rollins.